Hey guys, tonight we slip into ancient Egypt, where the desert bites and the Nile hums with secrets. Picture yourself trudging through scorching sands, the air thick with heat, while distant jackals howl under a star-crusted sky. You're surrounded by a world that feels alive, too alive, like every gust of wind might carry a god's whisper. Why did Egyptians dream up so many gods? Spoiler, you probably won't survive this story without wondering if your coffee maker deserves a shrine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in a land where chaos reigns. Egypt's not just sand and pyramids. It's a place where floods, droughts, and prowling beasts keep everyone on edge. The Nile might bless your crops or drown your village. A cobra could end your day before lunch. To make sense of this wild world, Egyptians didn't just pray. They built a divine roster to tame it. Historians know the Egyptians worshipped over 2,000 deities across their 3,000-year civilization, each one a piece of the cosmic puzzle. You can almost feel their need to explain why the sun burns or why scorpions sting. Imagine you're an Egyptian farmer, your feet caked in Nile mud. You look at the world and see forces bigger than you, way bigger. The sun doesn't just rise, it battles darkness to keep you alive. That's where gods like Ra, the sun god, come in. He's not some distant fairy tale. He's the guy steering the solar boat across the sky. But it's not just the big players. Egyptians saw divinity in the small stuff, too. A quirky tidbit: they revered a goddess named Hedjet for protection against scorpions. Scorpions! That's how granular this got. You're not just praying for a good harvest. You're begging Hedjet not to let that crawly nightmare ruin your sandal time. Why so many gods? Historians still argue whether this was a deliberate system or a chaotic pileup of local beliefs. Some say Egyptians created gods, like we collect apps. There's one for every problem. Floods? Pray to Hapi. Bad dreams? Bess has your back. Others think it was less organized, more like every village, tossing their own deity into the mix. Either way, you're standing in a world where nothing's random. Every breeze, every flood, every hiccup has a god behind it. You can't just shrug and say, "Stuff happens." That's not how Egypt rolls. You're starting to get why this pantheon's so crowded. It's not about lazy storytelling, it's about survival. Egyptians didn't have weather apps or pest control. They had gods, and each one was a way to grip the ungrippable, to name the unnameable. You're not just a farmer now. You're a cosmic detective, piecing together a world where every shadow might be divine. Before you nod off, picture this: a priest in a linen kilt, muttering prayers to keep chaos at bay. Spoiler, he's using crocodile dung as incense. Yeah, ancient Egypt's weird like that. As you drift, you realize this isn't just about gods. It's about humans wrestling with a world that doesn't play nice. You're not just hearing stories. You're walking through a mindset. The Nile's still flowing, the desert's still biting, and those gods, they're waiting for you to meet them. Let's keep going. You're still in ancient Egypt, the Nile's muddy pulse under your feet, the air heavy with silt and mystery. You've seen how chaos birthed gods, but now you zero in on the river itself, the lifeline that made Egypt tick. The Nile wasn't just water, it was a divine artery, and the gods tied to it were the heartbeat of survival. You're about to meet the deities who kept this land from crumbling into dust. Picture yourself on the riverbank, papyrus reeds brushing your shins. The Nile's flow is steady today, but you know it's fickle. One bad flood and your fields are gone. Too little water and you're chewing sand. Egyptians didn't just respect the Nile, they worshipped it. Enter Hapi, the god of the Nile's flood. He's no chiseled Adonis. He's often shown as a plump figure with a drooping chest, symbolizing abundance. Mainstream fact: Hapi was celebrated annually during the inundation season, when the Nile swelled and fertilized the land. Priests tossed offerings, food, flowers, sometimes gold, into the water to keep him happy. You can almost hear the chants, smell the incense wafting over the current. But Hapi's not alone. You glance at the river and notice frogs hopping in the mud. That's where Heket, the frog-headed goddess, slinks in. She's quirky, no doubt. Egyptians linked frogs to fertility because they multiplied like crazy after floods. A fringe tidbit: pregnant women wore Heket amulets, believing she'd speed up childbirth. You're chuckling, right? A frog goddess for labor pains? But to Egyptians, it made sense. The Nile cycles, flood, fertility, life, were sacred, and every ripple had a divine face. You're starting to see the pattern. The Nile wasn't just a river, it was a cosmic engine. Gods like Sobek, the crocodile deity, patrolled its waters. Sobek's no cuddly mascot. He's raw power, with a snout that could snap you in half. Temples dedicated to him, like the one at Kom Ombo, housed real crocodiles, mummified after death. You're wincing, imagining priests feeding those scaly pets. But Sobek wasn't just scary. He protected the Nile's bounty. Historians still argue whether Sobek was more feared or revered. Was he a guardian or a threat? Probably both, depending on whether you were a fisherman or a fish. As you squat by the river, you notice how every detail ties to a god. The silt nourishing crops, that's Hapi's gift. The fish in your net, Sobek's domain. Even the lotus flowers, bobbing on the surface, whisper of Nefertem, a god of beauty born from water. You're not just surviving here, you're living in a divine ecosystem. Egyptians didn't pray to one god for everything. That's too vague. They pinpointed deities like laser-guided missiles. Got a fishing problem? Sobek. Need a bumper harvest? Hapi's your guy. You're also picking up on the sarcasm of this world. Egyptians were practical. They didn't dream up gods for fun. They did it to hedge their bets. You're smirking, thinking of that crocodile dung incense from last time. Well, here's another gem. Some Nile priests used fish guts as offerings. Romantic, right? But it worked for them. The Nile was their lifeline, and its gods were their insurance policy. Before you drift deeper, imagine this. You're rowing a reed boat, the Nile's current tugging you along. The water's alive, not just with fish, but with divine will. You're not alone. Hapi's watching, Hecat's croaking, Sobek's lurking. These gods aren't distant. They're in the water, the mud, the air. You're starting to get why Egyptians needed so many. One god couldn't handle this river's mood swings. As you paddle, you wonder what's next. The Nile's just the start. There's a whole divine hierarchy waiting. You're still drifting along the Nile, the river's rhythm in your bones. But now you lift your eyes to the horizon. The pharaoh's palace looms, its limestone walls gleaming under the sun. You're about to see how pharaohs weren't just kings. They were divine bridges, linking you and every Egyptian to the gods. This is where the pantheon gets personal, tying heaven to earth through a single sandal-wearing mortal. You approach the palace, dodging guards with spears sharper than your worst hangover. Pharaoh's not just a ruler. He's a god incarnate. Mainstream fact: Egyptians believed pharaohs were Horus, the falcon-headed sky god, in human form. When a pharaoh died, he became Osiris, lord of the afterlife. You're picturing it, right? One guy, two gods, 0 days off. This divine double duty meant pharaohs were the ultimate middlemen. You pray to Ra for sun, Hapi for floods, but it's the pharaoh who channels those gods' vibes to keep Egypt humming. Now, let's get quirky. Ever hear of pharaoh's beard wigs? A fringe tidbit. Even clean-shaven pharaohs strapped on fake beards for ceremonies to mimic Osiris's divine chin fuzz. You're snickering, imagining a royal barber gluing on a beard while muttering, "Hold still, your majesty." But this wasn't just fashion, it was theology. The beard signaled Pharaoh's god-tier status, a reminder he wasn't your average Joe. You're starting to grasp the stakes. If Pharaoh's divine, his every move, war, harvest, even his morning stretch, matters to the cosmos. You slip into a temple courtyard where priests are chanting. Pharaoh's there, offering wine to Amun's statue. Why? Because he's not just praying, he's bargaining. Gods need humans to keep chaos at bay, and Pharaoh's the guy who seals the deal. You're watching him pour wine, and it hits you. This is why Egypt's pantheon is so vast. Each god has a job, but Pharaoh's the glue, tying their powers to your muddy fields and fish-filled nets. Historians still argue whether pharaohs truly believed they were gods or just played the part for clout. Some say it was pure politics. Others insist it was heartfelt faith. You're leaning toward both. Power and piety make a killer combo. As you linger, you notice the crowd. Farmers, weavers, even kids. They're all watching Pharaoh like he's the key to tomorrow's breakfast. And he is. A bad pharaoh could anger the gods, bringing drought or locusts. Remember that crocodile dung incense? Imagine the chaos if Pharaoh skips a ritual. You're chuckling, but it's nervous laughter. This system's fragile. One wrong move, and Sobek's chomping your village. You're also catching the vibe of this world. Egyptians didn't just worship gods. They worked with them. Pharaoh was the ultimate co-worker, clocking in to keep the divine machine running. You're smirking at the thought of a pharaoh's to-do list. Feed Amun, flatter Ra, don't tick off Sobek. But it's no joke. Temples were like cosmic HR offices, and Pharaoh was the manager, ensuring every god got their due. Before you doze off, picture this. You're in the palace shadow, the air thick with myrrh. Pharaoh lifts a scepter, and the crowd holds its breath. He's not just a man. He's Egypt's heartbeat, a living link to the gods you met by the Nile. You're starting to see why they needed so many deities. Each one's a cog, and Pharaoh's the one turning the wheel. As you blink into the dusk, you wonder who else is in this divine lineup. The gods are calling, and you're not done yet. You're still in the glow of the Pharaoh's world, the palace fading behind you as you trek into the wilder edges of Egypt. The air hums with life, buzzing scarabs, slithering snakes, a distant lion's roar. You're about to uncover why animals, not just people or rivers, became gods in Egypt's sprawling pantheon. These aren't your average zoo buddies. They're divine heavyweights, and you're walking their turf. You crouch in the reeds, eyeing a crocodile gliding through the Nile. That's Sobek again, but now you see him differently. Egyptians didn't just fear crocs. They saw power in their jaws, their stealth. Mainstream fact, Sobek's worship peaked in the Middle Kingdom, with temples like Calm Ombo, breeding live crocodiles as sacred avatars. You're picturing priests tossing fish to a toothy deity, hoping it doesn't fancy a leg instead. Animals weren't random mascots. They embodied traits Egyptians needed: strength, speed, survival. Now for the weird stuff. Ever hear of the scarab god Khepri? A fringe tidbit. Egyptians revered dung beetles because they rolled poop balls, mimicking the sun's journey across the sky. You're giggling, right? A poop-pushing bug as a god? But to Egyptians, Khepri was rebirth itself, tied to Ra's daily resurrection. You're starting to get it. Animals weren't just divine, they were metaphors. A falcon's flight became Horus's watchfulness. A cat's grace became Bastet's protection. You're dodging a stray cat now, wondering if it's judging you. Why animals? Historians still argue whether this was pure symbolism or something deeper, like ancient totemism. Some say Egyptians saw gods in animals because nature was their reality. Lions, cobras, and hippos weren't myths. They were neighbors. Others think it was practical. Deify the scary stuff, and maybe it won't eat you. You're leaning toward both. A cobra strike is terrifying, but call it Wadjet, the protector goddess, and suddenly it's on your team. You wander past a village where a woman kneels before a cat statue, muttering prayers. Cats were sacred to Bastet, guardian of homes. You're smirking, thinking of your own cat ignoring you. But here, Bastet's a big deal. She's not just cute. She's a shield against scorpions and bad vibes. Remember that crocodile dung incense? Well, cat mummies were a thing too. Thousands buried as offerings. You're wincing, but it shows how deep this ran. Animals weren't pets. They were divine middlemen, like pharaohs, but with claws. You're catching the rhythm of this world. Egyptians didn't just slap animal heads on gods for fun. They saw the wild as a divine blueprint. A hippo's bulk became Taweret, protector of childbirth. A jackal's cunning became Anubis, guide to the dead. You're chuckling at the thought of a cosmic HR meeting. Okay, Taweret, you're on pregnancy duty. Anubis, you've got funerals. But it worked. Animals grounded the gods, made them real, not abstract. Before you drift, picture this. You're in a temple, the air thick with resin. A falcon perches on a shrine, its eyes glinting like Horus himself. You feel it. These animal gods aren't distant. They're in the Nile's ripples, the desert's growl, the sky's swoop. You're not just learning about gods. You're walking with them. Why so many? Because Egypt's wild heart needed a divine zoo to match. As you blink into the dusk, you sense the sky calling. The gods up there have stories too. You're still in Egypt's wild embrace. The animal god's growls, fading as you tilt your head skyward. The sun blazes, a relentless orb, and the stars are starting to peek through the dusk. You're about to meet the deities who rule the heavens, sun, sky, and all that cosmic glitter. These gods aren't just up there. They're the pulse of Egypt's days and nights, and you're standing under their gaze. You shield your eyes, squinting at the sun. That's Ra, the heavy hitter of Egypt's pantheon. Mainstream fact: Ra was worshipped as the creator god, sailing his solar boat across the sky daily, battling the serpent Apep to ensure sunrise. You're picturing it, a golden god, rowing through clouds, duking it out with a cosmic snake. No wonder Egyptians built temples like Karnak to keep him happy. You're sweating just thinking about his workload. Ra's not alone, though. The sky's a crowded divine highway. Here's the quirky bit. Ever hear of the goddess Nut? A fringe tidbit. She's the sky itself. Her star-studded body arched over the earth, swallowing Ra each night and birthing him at dawn. You're chuckling, imagining priests explaining that one to kids. Yeah, the sky's a giant lady eating the sun. But it's poetic. Nut's body is the cosmos. Her stars, the souls of the dead. You're starting to see why Egyptians looked up. The sky wasn't empty. It was alive, packed with gods who shaped their world. You wander toward a temple, its obelisk piercing the heavens. Horus, the falcon god, rules here too, his sharp eyes scanning from above. You're remembering his animal roots, that piercing flight you saw in the last village. But up here, he's more. Sky god, Pharaoh's protector, Ra's heir. Historians still argue whether Horus and Ra were rivals or teammates. Some say temples merged them to simplify worship. Others think Egyptians just loved their divine drama. You're betting on drama. Egypt's gods thrive on it. As you linger, you notice priests tracking stars. The sky wasn't just pretty, it was a divine calendar. Thoth, the ibis-headed moon god, kept time, guiding farmers on when to plant. You're smirking, thinking of Thoth as Egypt's cosmic secretary, scribbling lunar memos. But it's no joke. His math kept the Nile's floods predictable. Remember that crocodile dung incense? Well, sky priests used star charts, not dung, to align temples with the heavens. You're relieved, but it shows how the sky gods grounded Egypt's chaos in order. You're catching the vibe now. The sun, moon, and stars weren't just lights. They were gods with jobs, brought life. Nut held the cosmos. Horus watched over power. Why so many? Because the sky's vast, and one god couldn't cover it. You're chuckling at the thought of Ra's solar boat getting a flat tire mid-journey. But to Egyptians, every sunrise was a victory, every star a story. Before you doze, picture this. You're on a rooftop, the desert cool under your feet. The Milky Way sprawls like Nut's glittering spine. You feel Ra's warmth lingering, Horus's gaze, Thoth's quiet calculations. These sky gods aren't distant. They're the roof over Egypt's soul. You're not just stargazing, you're meeting the divine architects of time itself. Why the crowded pantheon? The sky's too big for one boss. As you blink into the night, you sense a shift. Death's gods are waiting. You're still under Egypt's starlit sky, but the air feels heavier now, like the weight of eternity pressing down. You're leaving the sun and stars behind to step into the realm of death, where gods don't just rule, they judge, guide, and guard your soul. The afterlife wasn't a maybe for Egyptians. It was a bureaucracy, and you're about to navigate its divine red tape. You stand at the edge of a tomb, its cool stone walls etched with spells. Death wasn't the end here. It was a journey, and gods ran the show. Mainstream fact: Osiris, Lord of the Underworld, was the big name, judging souls in the Hall of Two Truths. You're picturing it, your heart on a scale, weighed against a feather. Too heavy? The monster Ammit chomps you. Pass the test, and you're chilling in the field of reeds. You're sweating, hoping your heart's light enough to avoid becoming demon chow. Now, for the oddball stuff. Ever hear of the god bees? A fringe tidbit. This dwarf-like, lion-faced deity wasn't just for bad dreams. He guarded mummies in tombs, scaring off evil spirits with his ugly mug. You're snickering, imagining Bess as a cosmic bouncer, sticking out his tongue at ghosts. But to Egyptians, he was a lifesaver, ensuring your corpse made it to Osiris's court. You're starting to see the afterlife as a divine assembly line, each god with a role. You slip deeper into the tomb, the air thick with resin and dust. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, looms in the shadows. He's not just a creepy doggo. He's the embalmer, weighing your heart, guiding you to Osiris. You're remembering his animal roots, those cunning jackals prowling cemeteries. Here, he's death's usher, ensuring you don't get lost. Historians still argue whether Anubis or Osiris was the original underworld boss. Some say Osiris stole the spotlight as myths evolved. Others think Anubis was always the sidekick. You're betting on a power struggle. Egypt loves its divine soap operas. As you trace the tomb's carvings, you notice Ma'at, goddess of truth. Her feather's the one your heart's weighed against. She's not flashy, but she's crucial. Order itself. You're chuckling, thinking of Ma'at as the afterlife's HR rep, keeping Osiris's court fair. But it's no joke. Egyptians obsessed over Ma'at's balance, mummifying bodies to preserve them for judgment. Remember that crocodile dung incense? Well, embalmers use natron salt, not dung, to dry corpses. You're relieved, but it shows how death was a science, not a shrug. You're catching the system now. Death wasn't chaos. It was a divine flowchart. Osiris judged, Anubis guided, Ma'at measured, Bes protected. Why so many gods? Because the afterlife was a high-stakes trip, and you needed a full crew. You're smirking at the thought of Anubis with a clipboard, checking your soul's paperwork. But to Egyptians, this was real. Every spell, every amulet, every god mattered. Before you drift, picture this. You're in the underworld, torchlight flickering on Anubis's black fur. Your heart's on the scale, Ma'at's feather gleaming. Osiris watches, Bes lurks, ready to pounce on any spirit that tries to mess with you. These gods aren't distant. They're your afterlife escorts, ensuring you reach eternity. Why the crowded pantheon? Death's too big for one guide. As you blink into the tomb's darkness, you sense life calling back. Local gods are next. You're stepping out of the tomb's chill, back into Egypt's sun-baked sprawl, where villages dot the Nile's banks like scattered beads. The air buzzes with chatter, goats bleating, and the clink of pottery. You're about to discover why every town had its own gods, turning Egypt's pantheon into a divine patchwork. These local deities weren't just sidekicks. They were the heart of community loyalty, and you're walking their streets. You pause in a dusty village square, where a shrine to a minor god, Min, stands proud. He's the fertility guy, linked to lettuce of all things. Mainstream fact, Min was worshipped in places like Akhmim, where farmers prayed for crops and kids. You're picturing it, folks tossing lettuce at his statue, hoping for a bumper harvest or a baby boom. It's not just quirky. It shows how gods were tailored to local needs. Big shots like Ra ruled everywhere, but Min? He's this town's MVP. Now for the weird stuff. Ever hear of the god Montu? A fringe tidbit. In some Nile Delta hamlets, this falcon-headed war god was honored with bullfights, his sacred animal duking it out for divine favor. You're chuckling, imagining a sacred showdown like a rural UFC match. But to villagers, Montu's bulls meant strength, protection, and bragging rights. You're starting to see why local gods mattered. Each town wanted a deity to call their own, a divine mascot for their struggles. You wander through the market, dodging baskets of barley and kids chasing geese. Every village had its shrine, its god, its vibe. In Bubastis, it's Bastet, the cat goddess, with festivals that drew thousands. In Hermopolis, it's Thoth, the moon god for scribes and nerds. Historians still argue whether these local cults were unified under big gods like Amun or just a chaotic free-for-all. Some say Egypt's religion was a loose network. Others think it was a divine turf war. You're leaning toward both. Villages loved their gods, but didn't mind sharing the spotlight. As you linger, you notice a potter praying to Ptah, Memphis's craft god. He's not begging for cosmic salvation, just a kiln that doesn't crack his pots. You're smirking, thinking of Ptah as the patron of Etsy artisans. But it's real. Local gods were practical, tied to daily grind. Remember that crocodile dung incense? Well, some villages used fish oil for their offerings. You're wrinkling your nose, but it shows how gods fit into every corner of life, from fields to forges. You're catching the rhythm now. Egypt's pantheon wasn't just top-down, it was grassroots. Min for farmers, Ptah for crafters, Montu for scrappy towns. Why so many gods? Because every village had its own story, its own fight. You're chuckling at the thought of a divine yearbook, most likely to bless lettuce, Min. But to Egyptians, these gods were family, not myths. Before you doze, picture this. You're at a village festival, drums thumping, locals dancing for Bastet or Montu. The air's thick with fish oil and faith. These gods aren't distant. They're neighbors, woven into the mud brick houses and Nile-soaked fields. Why the crowded pantheon? Because Egypt was a mosaic, and every piece needed its divine glue. As you blink into the firelight, you sense the gods getting closer, slipping into daily life. You're still in the village's warm glow, the festival's drums fading as dawn creeps over the Nile. You're weaving through daily life now. Mud brick homes, bustling markets, kids dodging chores. The gods aren't just for festivals or tombs. They're in every moment, shaping how Egyptians live, work, and even sneeze. You're about to see how this divine crew infiltrates the grind, making the pantheon feel like your nosy neighbors. You stop at a baker's stall, the air thick with barley and heat. The baker mutters a prayer to Hathor, goddess of joy and bread. Mainstream fact, Hathor was worshipped in homes and temples. Her sistrum rattles shaken to bless food and music. You're picturing it, every loaf kneaded with a side of divine mojo. Hathor's not just a cosmic cheerleader. She's in the flour dust, ensuring your breakfast doesn't flop. You're starting to get why gods were everywhere. Life was too fragile to leave to chance. Now for the oddball stuff. Ever hear of Taweret? A fringe tidbit. This hippo-headed goddess was a household favorite. Her amulets tucked into cribs to protect babies. You're chuckling, imagining a hippo deity as a divine nanny, glaring at evil spirits. But to Egyptian moms, Taweret was a lifeline. Childbirth was brutal, and her toothy grin meant safety. You're noticing how gods like her weren't lofty. They were intimate, tangled in daily fears and hopes. You wander past a weaver's hut, where a woman prays to Neith, goddess of crafts and war. Her loom hums, each thread a nod to Neith's skill. You're smirking, thinking of Neith as the patron of multitasking, spinning thread and slaying enemies. But it's no joke. Gods shaped routines. Farmers leaned on Hapi, scribes on Thoth, even doctors on Sekhmet, the lioness of healing. Historians still argue whether these daily rituals were heartfelt or just habit. Some say Egyptians were devout. Others think it was cultural autopilot. You're betting on both, faith and muscle memory braided tight. As you linger, you spot a kid slipping a Bes amulet under his mat. Remember Bes, the tomb bouncer? He's also the nightmare chaser, keeping kids sleep demon-free. You're chuckling at the thought of Bes's ugly mug as a sleep aid, but it shows how gods were practical. No problem was too small. Bad dreams, bad crops, bad vibes. Remember that fish oil offering? Well, some households burn sesame seeds for Hathor. You're wrinkling your nose, but it's proof gods were in the air, the food, the beds. You're catching the vibe now. The pantheon wasn't just for priests or pharaohs. It was for you, baker, weaver, kid with a nightmare. Why so many gods? Because life had too many cracks, and each deity plugged one. You're smirking at the idea of a divine customer service desk. Lost your harvest? Call Hapi. Baby won't sleep. Taweret's on it. But to Egyptians, this was survival, not bureaucracy. Before you drift, picture this. You're in a cramped home, the lamp flickering. A mother hums to Hathor. A weaver nods to Neith. A kid clutches Bes. These gods aren't distant. They're in the dough, the thread, the shadows. Why the crowded pantheon? Because every day was a gamble, and you needed divine backup for every role. As you blink into the lamplight, you sense the gods evolving, blending into new forms. You're still in the hum of Egyptian life, the scent of sesame and Nile mud lingering as you move through time. The villages, temples, and daily prayers are shifting now. Gods aren't static. They blend, merge, and morph like cosmic smoothies. You're about to trace how Egypt's pantheon evolved, with deities combining and faiths twisting to match a changing world. This is where the divine gets messy, and you're diving in. You stand in a temple, its walls carved with Amun-Ra, a god mashup that screams power. Mainstream fact, Amun, a Theban wind god, merged with Ra, the sun god, around 2000 BCE to form Amun-Ra, Egypt's ultimate deity during the New Kingdom. You're picturing it. Two gods, one name, ruling from Karnak's massive temple. This wasn't just a rebrand. It was politics and faith colliding, uniting northern and southern worshippers. You're starting to see how gods adapted, reflecting Egypt's own growing pains. Now for the quirky stuff. Ever hear of Serapis? A fringe tidbit. During the Ptolemaic period, Greek rulers cooked up this god, blending Osiris with Greek deities like Zeus and Hades to bridge Egyptian and Greek cultures. You're chuckling, imagining priests pitching Serapis like a divine startup. He's Osiris, but with a beard and Greek flair. But it worked. Alexandria's Serapis cult drew crowds, showing how gods could flex to fit new vibes. You're noticing the pantheon's not a museum. It's a living, shifting thing. You wander through a marketplace where traders chatter in Egyptian and Greek. Gods are mixing here too. Isis, Osiris's wife, is going global, her cult spreading to Rome. She's not just a mom goddess now. She's magic, wisdom, everything. Historians still argue whether these mergers diluted Egyptian faith or strengthened it. Some say blending gods was a survival tactic under foreign rule. Others think it was organic, like cultural fan fiction. You're leaning toward both. Egyptians loved their gods, but weren't afraid to remix them. As you linger, you spot a shrine to Aten, the sun disk. Remember Ra? Aten's his weird cousin, pushed by Pharaoh Akhenaten as the god, sidelining others. It flopped. Egyptians loved their divine buffet too much. You're smirking, thinking of Akhenaten as the guy who tried to cancel pizza for kale. But it shows how gods could shift, even if some experiments tanked. Remember that fish oil offering? Well, Aten's priests used pure sunlight, no oils. You're squinting, but it proves God's bent to new ideas. Even briefly, you're catching the flow now. The pantheon wasn't fixed, it was fluid. Amun, Ete, Ra. Isis went viral. Serapis bridged worlds. Why so many gods? Because Egypt itself was a crossroads. Pharaohs, Greeks, Romans all stirred the pot. You're chuckling at the thought of a divine playlist. Gods remixed like DJ tracks. But to Egyptians, these shifts kept their faith alive, relevant, bendy. Before you doze, picture this. You're in Alexandria, waves lapping, a Serapis statue gleaming. Amun-Ra's priests chant nearby. Isis amulets jingle in the market. These gods aren't frozen. They're evolving, like Egypt itself. Why the crowded pantheon? Because a living culture needs gods that dance to its beat. As you blink into the sea breeze, you sense the end nearing. Time to ask why these gods still matter. You're standing at the edge of Egypt's story, the Nile's murmur blending with the desert's hush. The gods you've met, Ra, Sobek, Isis, and the rest, still echo in the air, their temples crumbling, but their presence lingering. You're about to reflect on why Egypt's crowded pantheon endures, why these deities still whisper to us across millennia. This is the final stretch where you tie the divine knot and see what it all means. You gaze at a faded obelisk, its carvings worn but defiant. Mainstream fact: Egypt's religion shaped its art, architecture, and laws, with gods like Ma'at inspiring justice systems that influenced later cultures, including Greece and Rome. You're picturing it, Ma'at's feather of truth guiding not just souls, but entire societies. These gods weren't just worshipped, they built a civilization that still dazzles, from pyramids to papyrus scrolls. You're starting to see their legacy as more than myths. It's the blueprint of a world. Now, for the quirky stuff. Ever hear of modern Bastet fans? A fringe tidbit. Today's neo-pagans and cat lovers revive Bastet's worship, with Etsy shops selling her amulets alongside coffee mugs. You're chuckling, imagining Bastet as the patron of internet cat videos. But it's real. Her protective vibe resonates, proof that Egypt's gods still spark imagination. You're noticing how these deities aren't locked in museums. They live in our stories, our memes, our dreams. You wander through a mental gallery of gods. Why so many? Because Egypt faced a universe of challenges: floods, death, war, love. And each god was a tool to cope. Ra lit the way. Osiris promised eternity. Taweret guarded cribs. Historians still argue whether this pantheon was a unified system or a glorious mess. Some say it was a divine org chart. Others think it was a cultural free-for-all. You're leaning toward both. Egypt's gods were order and chaos, like the Nile itself. As you linger, you recall the crocodile dung incense, the lettuce for Min, the star charts for Thoth. These weren't just quirks. They were Egypt's heartbeat, tying people to their world. You're smirking, thinking of a modern god for Wi-Fi crashes. Maybe Bess could handle that too. But it's no joke. Egypt's pantheon endures because it was human, reflecting our need to name the unnameable, to find meaning in the mess. You're catching the big picture now. These gods gave Egypt resilience, a way to face the desert's bite and the Nile's moods. Their legacy? It's in the stories we tell, the laws we write, the cats we pamper. Why so many gods? Because life's too vast for one. You're chuckling at the thought of a divine group chat Ra texting Sobek about sunrise shifts. But to Egyptians, this was their truth, a god for every moment, every fear, every hope. Now, let's slow down, your eyelids growing heavy as the Nile's gentle lap fades. You're drifting, the gods' faces softening into starlight, Ra's glow, Nut's starry arch, Bastet's quiet purr. You've walked their world, felt their power in the river, the tombs, the villages. There's no need to rush. You're safe here, wrapped in the hum of ancient stories. These gods, so many, so vivid, were Egypt's way of holding chaos at bay, of whispering hope into the dark. They're still with you, not as statues, but as echoes, in the rustle of leaves or the warmth of morning light. Let your breath ease, long and slow, like sand settling after a storm. The desert's quiet now, the Nile a distant lullaby. You're not just sleeping, you're slipping into their eternal embrace, where every dream is a piece of their story. Rest, knowing you've touched their truth. Sweet dreams.